Hi and welcome to the Bible channel. Is Vladimir Putin the mysterious Gog described in Bible prophecy? In this deep dive Bible study, we explore whether the Russian leader could fulfill the ancient prophecies of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Join us now as we examine geopolitical events, historical context, and biblical clues in this revealing study. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and drop us a comment in the comment section with your thoughts.
Question is Putin the Gog of Armageddon? And I'll tell you what the answer is. I don't know. But if it's going to be somebody else, it's going to be a fellow who's just like President Putin. Just like him. Because I think God has raised up people in these last days to fulfill his prophecies precisely and to the letter. And we're going to see some key words in this chapter that it's worth having a close look at. They are the word guard and the word come. All right, so we're going to see some things that are going to happen very, very soon. Guard, Brother Thomas in exposition of Daniel, which we're going to be talking about a little bit, uses that word to say there will be war in Europe before Armageddon. Come, art thou come to take a spoil? Who's saying that? The Arabs in Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states, and Tarshish and the young lions. Art thou come? What does that tell us? It tells us that they are in Israel when Armageddon takes place. And Brother Thomas points that out in exposition of Daniel. Now, I haven't really looked at that closely before. But Brother Thomas takes words and says, they have a powerful meaning. Interesting, isn't it? I think we always sort of thought, well, the Gulf states and Britain, they'll be over there near the Persian Gulf somewhere saying, what are you doing? No, art thou come into the land. So they're there. How's that going to happen? We can't know exactly, but it looks like they'll be there to help defend Israel. They will be swept aside, but they'll be in the land. Interesting. I don't think I really saw that clearly until just recently. And war in Europe. Yes, it's going to happen. Going to happen. The NATO powers are counting on Russia not invading in Europe, rolling over from Ukraine until 2029. Are they right? I think it might be sooner. Could well be sooner. So let's look at these key words. But we're going to go through this and talk about Mr. Putin and why we think he fits the bill and why we think that he's most likely the person, but if it's not, somebody is going to be exactly like him, same character, same motivations, same kind of background, same kind of purposes. So is he the Gog? Well, I'm probably going to use some presumptive words when I talk about him and saying he will do this and he will do that. So bear with me on that. It's not him. It'll be Mr. Somebody who's right behind him. So here we are. The Bible tells us a lot about the man who is Gog. It tells us a lot about the man who leads the invasion of the Middle East, who brings the nations to Armageddon. The Gog, the one at the roof or the top, as the word Gog means, the Agag of the future, the antitypical Amalekite king who comes upon the weakness of Israel to take a spoil. It's like the Amalekites did in time gone by, cut off the weak ones and gradually tried to overcome the nation. This is the kind of leader that Putin will be. He will come into the Middle East to do those sorts of things. Now, he's called, in the scriptures, we can see his description and the factors that point out the kind of personality that makes up this person that God has raised up. Now, he's been many, many years in the making, and from prior to the year 2000, he's really been there in leadership roles, and ultimately, of course, president, and he could almost make himself president for life. He's still only very young, early 70s. Doesn't sound young to some of us, but it does to many of us. He's still very young. He's still got plenty of energy, plenty of vigour, and of course, plenty of power. And he rules with an iron fist, as we know. Now, he's described in the scriptures in three main places. We'll also mention Isaiah 19 when he comes into Egypt, but the description there is pretty brief. He's mainly described for us in this chapter we just read, and in Daniel chapter 8, quite a lot of detail about the personality of this man of the latter days, and Daniel chapter 11 as the king of the north. So let's have a little look at some of the descriptions. When George W. Bush was president, early 2000s, he got on rather well with President Putin. He went to meet him, and he came back and he said, I looked into his eyes and I could see his soul. Okay. Well, then Joe Biden became vice president. He met Putin, and he came back and reported, he said, I'm looking into your eyes and I don't think you have a soul. And Putin's answer was, we understand each other. So there's a man without a soul. And what does that mean? How does the Bible describe him? Well, here's a summary. In Isaiah chapter 19, when the king of the north comes down into Egypt, he's described as Egypt being given into the hands of a cruel lord and a fierce king. Now, he doesn't just become cruel and fierce when he gets to Egypt. He's already cruel and fierce. And that's this man we're looking at in the world right now. As we said, could be somebody else, but I'm going to leave that aside. I'm talking about Putin as most likely being, because we are in the very, very last times, most likely being the one that God wants to use for his great purpose of bringing the world to its knees and ultimately setting up the Lord Jesus Christ as king. Then in Daniel chapter 8, the rest of the list down there until we get to the second bottom one, that Daniel chapter 8 features all those particular characteristics. I've anglicised them from the language that's used in those verses and said he's deceitful, he's crafty, he'll cause craft to prosper. We'll look in a moment at some of these passages. He's a person who will lie without a conscience. That's clear from what Daniel describes, or it's described to Daniel. A treacherous person, a person who seeks profit and riches. Those terms are used, prospering, obsessed with his own vision of what his plans are. He's a man of fierce countenance, that's taken directly from those verses. He's a master of intrigue, and he's manipulative. He knows how to deal with human nature and the people who he's had to deal with, opponents. And he's conceited, and he's proud, and he's arrogant. All that's there in Daniel 8. We'll look at that in a moment. The description of the little horn of the east. That's who he is. Then Ezekiel chapter 38, we've read, thou shalt think an evil thought, you'll take a prey. So he has evil thoughts of taking easy prey. And finally, in Daniel 11 verse 44, we read that he goes forth in great fury to destroy. He's furious and he's destructive. Now, I think the man fits the bill. And clearly the scripture has given us numerous descriptions so that we can identify in our day, are we in the very, very latter times, as these prophecies are talking about? Yes, I'm sure we are. Take this, for example. The 7th of October, President Putin's birthday. In 2023, he turned 71. Earlier in the year, in March, Hamas leaders went to Moscow and they had a meeting with Russian leaders there, and the Foreign Ministry gave out its report of that meeting saying, we touched on Russia's unchanged position in support of a just solution to the Palestinian problem. Well, they talked about the scheme for October, no doubt. Then, less than a month before, September the 10th, 2023, Hamas chief, who's now dead, Ismail Haniyeh, visited Moscow, and the report, numerous reports I've read, likely briefed the Kremlin on Hamas's final preparations for the attack timed to take place on Putin's 71st birthday. What did Hamas think of Putin? Hamas thought he was the kind of man who would like a massacre for a birthday present. That's the kind of man he is. And they judged him rightly, I'm sure. He's that kind of a cold and calculating character. So Russia was in on what was taking place before it happened on the 7th of October. Daniel chapter 7 gives us a vision of the animals which represent the four great world empires. Of course, the lion, first of all, has the heart of a man. Then comes along the Medo-Persian Empire. And the Medo-Persian Empire represented by the bear, and Russia is well known as being represented by the bear. So first of all, the lion is a kind of a kindly creature, the Babylonian one, given the heart of a man. And of course, it represents to us the change in Nebuchadnezzar after God dealt with him in the appropriate way, and he changed and became a man who honoured his God, who honoured Yahweh. So the second one, though, is like a bear. Medo-Persians. It raises itself up on one side. It had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it, and they said to it, "Arise and devour much flesh." This is a pretty violent animal. It's an animal that which will think nothing of taking much flesh. Now there's Mr. Putin in the little picture there, and he is a man, interestingly enough, when you watch him, who raises himself up on one side. On his left side, he swings the arm quite dramatically. He is a one-sided walker. There's a reason they say for that, but let's have a look. It's called what people refer to as the gunslinger gait. The left arm moves, the right hand stays down close to the gun holster. They're taught that in the KGB, apparently. That's the story. So on one side, he moves in a dramatic way. There he is, left arm raised up on one side, very, very powerful. So they say there's a reason for it. Some say that it's a natural thing, but no, it's a projection of power. Now, of course, on the one side was the Persian Empire. It's all gone a bit quiet now, has it? Because I turned it down a bit, or maybe Robbie turned it down a bit. Anyway, hope you can hear. So perhaps he fulfills the bear that raises itself up on one side. That's an interesting side matter. But let's have a look at it. Now, the Persian Empire, from about 539 down to the time of Alexander the Great, the Medo-Persian bear, had the 3 ribs in the teeth. And the 3 ribs were the empires which they overtook, which was and very violently so, the Empire of Lydia, modern-day Turkey, Western Turkey, the Babylonian Empire, and the Egyptian Empire, in that order. They first went and took over. This is Cyrus the Great comes into Lydia. Why does he go to Lydia first? Lydia was a very, very wealthy empire. The legends which led to the formation of the Lydian power involve Midas and Midas's gold. There was a lot of gold in Lydia. And, of course, the story was that Midas had done the right thing by the gods, so he asked the gods for a favour, and they said, well, what would you like? He said, I'd like everything I touch to turn to gold. Wonderful. It was for a little while until he worked out that when he touched his food, it turned to gold, and he couldn't eat it. And then when he touched his daughter to hug her, she turned to gold. Don't let that happen. They said, well, if you bathe in the river, in the capital Sardis, bathe in the river, all the gold will fall into the river. And so the river there is apparently, in those days, you could pan anywhere and come out with lots and lots of gold. So it was a very wealthy country. King Croesus, it was a real king, as opposed to Midas, was known for his wealth. So they went in and Cyrus took the wealth of Lydia and used it to invade Babylonian Empire, which of course included the area of Israel, and then down into Egypt. Now that's what's going to happen when Russia comes down. They're going to take over the area formerly known as Lydia. Istanbul, you can see on the map there, That's where they're going to start. And then the invasion will proceed south, and the bear will come down and take over and put the ribs in its teeth as it comes down, devouring much flesh. The same program, the same process. And what wealth they'll find in Istanbul, I can't be absolutely sure, but strategically, that's the place to be. Because after all, he also took Lydia to fend off the Greeks, the Macedonians, the city-states that were forming, which became the Greek Empire, and to put the area there in between, the Bosphorus, between Turkey now and Greece and Macedonia, to create a barrier or a buffer zone there against any attacks from that area. Well, of course, it's a very strategic area, and control of entrance and exit through the Black Sea and into the Mediterranean is right there. So it's strategic. It's a place that Russia will want to control in the same way as Cyrus did in time gone by. Then to move further south in the same way. Now I want to talk a little bit about Exposition of Daniel, Brother Thomas's book, getting more and more valuable in my mind as days go on. Absolutely powerful book. You can see on the map there, top left hand of that slide, the countries involved in the Crimean War. Crimean War is still going on today. You know, it's changed its hands a bit over time since the Crimean War too. And of course, the area of Crimea, that little, promontory, I suppose, between Ukraine and Russia, has changed hands, and the war is still going on as to who controls that particular area. Now, the Crimean War in days gone by is the time that Brother Thomas was writing Exposition of Daniel. And at that time, the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire, was declining, and Russia was moving in to take over that territory. Now, a very strategic area, and for that reason, other countries, mainly Britain and France, got together with the Turks to defeat the Russians. And the Russians were driven out of Crimea, and the Russians were not allowed to, as a result of the Allies' victory, to have any ships in the Black Sea. We know that has to change and has changed, and will be more changes when Russia comes down, because they will come down with many ships. But that was the result of the Crimean War. Now, of course, 50 years before that or less, Britain and France, something like 40 years before, had been at war, but they joined together, and they were combining with Turkey to at least, well, of course, they had an interest in what would happen for the future of Turkey too. They wanted interests in the Middle East as well, and they didn't want Russia to have that control. Russia was defeated. Now, Brother Thomas is writing around that time. What we need to do is to read this book, putting ourselves in the picture of the 1850s and putting ourselves into what was going on in the world at that time. It's fairly easy to see from what Brother Thomas writes. You don't have to read much other history to get an idea of it. But then bring it forward to today. Brother Thomas thought, of course, that was the very time of the end. But the same kind of circumstances are happening today. We just need to put ourselves in that picture. That's what I'm going to do in a few relations, a few aspects during this talk. So here we are. Brother Thomas, at that time, he predicted, okay, Russia's been defeated now, but Russia will be triumphant and all of Europe will be chained. Now, that was the title of the book in the early times. Anatolia meaning the area of the East. The Eastern question was still being debated. Who's going to look after and control the area over there once the Turkish Empire dries up? That was the subject of lots of political discussion for decades. And Brother Thomas said Russia will be triumphant and Europe will be in chains on the basis, he said, of Ezekiel chapter 38 and verse 7. Be thou a guard unto them. All right, puts a lot of store on a word, but so it should be. But of course, the whole context tells us that he's right. So here is the empire, the Grecian Empire, under Alexander the Great. Alexander took over from the bear power He was the leopard with the wings that moved so quickly and dramatically right across the Bosphorus. A couple of battles there, Granicus, and then the Battle of Issus, which was critical because it was at the Battle of Issus that king met king. And that's what Daniel chapter 8 tells us, that the king meets the king. And that was the battle in which Alexander the Great fought with Darius. And Darius came into that battle and was thoroughly overthrown. And from there, of course, Alexander, in a matter of a few years, really raced right across to India. Amazing. So that then, as a result of that Grecian Empire taking over and Alexander dying quite young, the empire was divided into four under the four generals of Alexander, and from one of those generals comes a little horn. And this is the little horn which Daniel chapter 8 tells us just grows and grows and grows and grows in power. Started out relatively small in Constantinople, the very critical place that became the centre of the King of the North. So this is the little horn which is described for us in detail when it comes to the latter days. Now, that area and that territory became linked with Russia at the time of Vladimir the Great, Vladimir the First. In 1015, Vladimir was ruler of Kievan Rus. The capital was Kiev, the same as Ukraine today. The Kievan Rus power ruled that area in the yellow. And of course, they had bigger fields to conquer. Part of that was that Vladimir thought to combine all of our disparate tribes and peoples with their different gods and different worship and different philosophies. We really need one religion. And as a result of that move, took a little while to sort that all out. As a result of that move, he chose to worship Christianity centred in Byzantium, which was, of course, Constantinople, to become Constantinople later on. Well, it actually was actually called Constantinople in time, and it also changed its name to Byzantium. Okay, so he married the daughter of one of the princesses, the Christian princess from Constantinople, and turned his whole country. He said, okay, we're all going to become Christians. You're all going to have a mass baptism, whether they liked it or not. So they became Christians. So Russia and Constantinople came together, and that empire became one. The little horn, centred in Constantinople, grew and incorporated many of those territories of Russia and expanded, so that now today, Rus has become Rosh, and there are all the countries involved mentioned here in Ezekiel 38 in Armageddon. So Rosh, the centre, as you can see, right north of the Black Sea, is the original Rus power, known as Russia, Rosh from the scriptures, Prince of Rosh. Now this passage, be thou a guard unto them. The word actually means a prison guard. A prison guard. It's used of Joseph when he's in prison in Egypt. It's actually an imprisonment. And this imprisonment is one which is really captures all these countries and locks them in. And they are locked in not of their own will. You don't go to prison because you want to. Okay, so they're a guard. Be thou a guard unto them. So Brother Thomas says, this really gives us a picture of what the relationships of these countries to Rosh is going to be. The question is, many people are wondering, some people are even saying that Zelensky can win the war. No. Can he save Europe from the tyrant? There's absolutely no chance that that is going to happen. The Bible tells us so. So, here is Mr. Putin. Look at the power that he wields. Look at the manner of his empire. Look at the state of his army, and we'll look at that in a moment. But first of all, get a picture of how these people in Russia feel about their country and their willingness not only to defend it, but to expand their borders. Notice the words of the songs they're singing. Our Soviet Union will punish the whole world from Europe to the Neva in the east. The Neva is the river of St. Petersburg. We're going to punish, we're going to control all of Europe, and we'll bring them to their knees. That's basically what their song says. Now look at the Russian military now. Total personnel in the Russian military, 3.5 million people. Active soldiers, 1.3 million people. In reserve, another 2 million. They're calling them up all the time. Paramilitary units, 250,000. Now, I've tended to think of Ukraine as being relatively small and insignificant, and how is it that Russia hasn't overrun them? Well, their numbers are pretty high too. 2.2 million in their military, and 980,000 active soldiers, 1.2 million in reserve. They have a big army. Now let's have a look at this relative to other countries in Europe in a moment. They are also very, very clever. Very, very clever. And by the way, there are a lot of Jews in Ukraine, and they are pretty good at organising unexpected things to happen, as, for example, this one. You remember how the pages all exploded in the hands and pockets of the Hezbollah people. That was planned a long, long time in advance, a very surreptitious way of dealing with enemy, and certainly neutralising a lot of their influence and power. Well, here's another case. 18 months in the planning, Operation Spiderweb, 117 drones, all with one individual operator, each one operated by one person, to go through and rise up almost out of nowhere in Russia's own territory and destroy 34% of their strategic bomber fleet. Quite an incredible thing. But what sort of reaction is Russia and Mr. Putin going to give to this? An audacious attack. How will Putin respond, and what does NATO think about it all?
June 1. Ukrainian drones strike strategic bombers at 5 Russian air bases. Over 40 planes claim to be 34% of Russia's bombers destroyed, some capable of even carrying cruise missiles. All eyes are now on the potential blowback from the challenge to the Russian ego. Here are the 6 Russian super weapons that remain unused in the current war, but could redefine its course if deployed. Avangard is the hypersonic glide vehicle. The Burevestnik is a nuclear-powered cruise missile. The Zircon is a scramjet-powered hypersonic anti-ship missile. The Kinzhal is a hypersonic air-launched ballistic missile. The Poseidon is a nuclear-capable unmanned underwater drone. And the Selmer, super heavy MIRV-equipped intercontinental ballistic missile.
And I think this we all know this matters more than ever, given the very real threat from a rapidly rearming Russia, which allies in this region know all too well. Our discussions today come at a crucial time. Later this week, indeed, NATO defense ministers will first meet in Brussels to agree ambitious new capability targets linked directly to our defense plans. These targets set out what forces and capabilities every ally needs to provide to keep our deterrence and defense strong and our 1 billion people safe. To do that, it is clear that allies need to spend much more than we are doing now.
much, much, much more. Well, in the last couple of days, the NATO defence people have all met together and decided to spend 5% of their gross domestic product on the military, 3.5% on actual weapons, and 1.5% on other infrastructure to support the defence of NATO. And they've come up to that agreement. Now, remember only a few years ago when Donald Trump was in his first presidency, he was trying to get them up to a 2% expenditure. Now it's 5%. And they need to do it very, very rapidly. This has been called Putin's Pearl Harbor moment. And we remember in December 1941, when the Japanese planes came over in Hawaii and bombed the American fleet while it was at rest on a Sunday morning, that shook the Americans to the core, and they declared war to support Britain, that had been asking them to come into the war for 2 years. Well, the US declared war against the Japanese and, of course, came into the World War. The response was absolute anger and absolute fury at what had happened. Well, Putin's having his Pearl Harbor moment. What's going to be his response? He's already started some level of response, but everyone expects it to be much, much greater. The crazy thing is, so far as American attitudes are concerned, that there was a 1.25 hour phone call between Putin and Trump soon after that attack that Ukraine pulled off. And Trump gave a message after that phone call indicating he had no chance of persuading Putin not to go further with the war. And basically he's thrown up his hands, Trump, thrown up his hands and said, at a recent interview, he said, let them fight it out like kids in the schoolyard. He's really wiping his hands. And America is not going to support Europe. America is gradually withdrawing and basically saying the Atlantic Ocean's between us and you, you look after it. You deal with Russia. And he said he'd solve the problem in 24 hours. Of course, absolutely impossible. And he knows that now. And to save face, he's basically saying, well, let them fight it out and let Europe sort it out. Not my war, he keeps on saying. Not my war. Started in President Biden's time. Not my war. I don't want anything more to do with it. And so America is going to withdraw more and more from Europe and leave them to defend themselves. Yes, they may put a little bit of effort into it, but it won't be anything significant. And Russia will be able to move as they will. Well, if it goes nuclear, and a lot of people are still suggesting that, and of course Medvedev, who we saw there a moment ago in that video, former president for a few years in Russia while he kept the seat warm for Putin to come back under the constitution. Medvedev is Putin's garrulous mouthpiece. You know, he's a fellow who announces all the rough stuff that Russia is going to do, and keeps threatening that they'll use their nuclear weapons. If they did, they have the most warheads of any country, many more than the United States. The United States Defense Secretary is admitting that they are behind in their technology, and Russia has made many, many advances. And of course, China is building more. France has a nominal number. United Kingdom has a nominal number. Each of those could destroy the world many times over. But if tactical nuclear weapons are a possibility in Europe. We've seen the Oreshnik missile was fired in November by Russia over Ukraine at a critical time. Multiple warheads came smashing down, frightening the wits out of everybody. They do have dramatically superior weapons that they can use, and they can use those without necessarily destroying all the other countries of Europe, but bringing them to their knees and say, what do we do? Well, you can come into my prison and work with me for my future goals. It's what Brother Thomas saw. We'll look at it in a moment. Okay. Brother Thomas used these words. He said, Europe will be conquered and crestfallen. And he speaks of the armies of Europe being conquered and crestfallen. I'll show you the quote in a moment. But this is the fact. War in Europe, brothers and sisters, is inevitable. And we could see it happen. We certainly believe we could be taken this afternoon We certainly believe that. But these prophecies have been given to us to see these developments. They are signs for us. So it could well be that there will be war in Europe very, very soon. And, of course, the fist of Russia against the Europeans will smash them, absolutely smash them. So we could well see that. Now, how has this come about? Why is Europe so relatively weak? After all, they were strong in war times, in time gone by. Well, the Cold War went on for decades, but it ended in the late 1980s. The Berlin Wall came down. Here's Ronald Reagan speaking in 1987 in front of the Berlin Wall, and it came down just a short while, a couple of years later.
Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Now, of course, he's speaking there at the Brandenburg Gate, the division between East and West, between communism and the so-called free world. And the wall came down, and there was a rapprochement, and there was glasnost, and Gorbachev and Reagan introduced an era of relatively peace and security. And as a result of that, Margaret Thatcher in the UK and President H.W. Bush, the old President Bush, got together and said, let's talk about the peace dividend. The peace dividend is that we are at peace now in Europe, and therefore we can spend more money on social needs. We don't need to spend money on weapons. And so the armies were reduced, the expenditure on armaments was reduced, but not in Russia, and certainly not since Mr. Putin came to power. But the Western world basked in the peace dividend, and as we said, social reforms increased, and really the Western powers in Europe and the UK became rather socialist in their approach to things. And the question was, this is the opening up of a new stream of economic theory called guns and butter. Economic modelling on the basis of the balance of expenditure between defence, guns, or social improvements and so on, guns and butter. And butter won out for a few decades. Butter won out. So that was the question which confronted people. Do we spend our money on swords or ploughshares? Well, now we're going to have to spend 5% on swords and less on ploughshares and social arrangements. So the world is changing again, and it's become butter, rather from butter, as it was butter, it's turning into guns. That's the world's approach. So in Ezekiel chapter 38, we just read, here is the prince of Rosh, Mesech and Tubal in verse 2, together with others, the Mesech and Tubal, of course, meaning eastern Russia and Siberia. And I will turn thee back and I will bring you down. You might not have been concentrating on the area of Israel, but I'm going to turn you around and bring you down into the land. And together with Persia and Ethiopia and Libya and Gomer and Togarmah and all those countries that we've seen on the map earlier on. So Persia, of course, Iran, very much in the camp with Russia and supplying Russia with drones and other trading with them in other ways. And, of course, Russia supporting them in their efforts to overcome Israel. Ethiopia is, in the original language, Cush. And let's not think that it's just the little country of Ethiopia or even Sudan. It's all of southern Africa. And all of southern Africa is very, very quickly coming into the Russian camp, right down to South Africa at the very bottom, which is a big part of what's called the BRICS group of countries, who are a trading bloc endeavouring to go against the American dollar. So Russia is certainly supporting those countries for giving debt and giving them arms and weapons. All of that area is Cush. Libya is all of northern Africa. And so not just limited to that country. We need to go back, of course, to the original names and go back to Genesis 10 and look where these countries actually existed and how they expanded as the nations developed after the Tower of Babel. So these countries are all together, and they are a big, big block of nations with very large armies, and they will think, or Gog will think, an evil thought, easy prey. Now, Brother Thomas says of this, again in Exposition of Daniel, of this group of nations, who are they all? Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Holland, Belgium, France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, Prussia, Austria, Turkey, Persia, Tartary, Greece, the Roman Africa, and Egypt. This will be a dominion of great magnitude extending from the North Sea to the wall of China and Afghanistan. That's, of course, right across the top of Mongolia, Afghanistan, the area that Alexander the Great went to, and from the Ice Sea in the North Pole down to the deserts of Africa and Arabia. Whole territory. Now, some people have been saying recently, and please don't take these ideas to yourselves, have been saying that, for example, Gomer is not France. Gomer is a little area in Turkey, or just a little bit north of Turkey. It doesn't include all those western areas. It certainly does. It certainly does. The historians tell us quite plainly. And you can look at Josephus, Herodotus, others that tell us that the Gomerites went right the way down to Spain and Portugal and occupied all of that area, of course all of France and those areas of continental Europe. Here's an idea of what's going to happen. Have a look at the size of the armies. On the right-hand side, here is the Russian army. Russia is against Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is a pretty significant army, as you can see there. So the active soldiers, 1.5 million roughly in Russia on the right, 880,000 under arms in Ukraine. What happens when Ukraine topples? Whoosh, straight through. All the other countries, United Kingdom there, it shows 138,000 total, that's in about the middle. They actually only have about 70,000 soldiers ready for war. Australia, 30,000. So, the countries of Europe do not have the ability or the manpower to overcome a cloud that comes to cover over Europe. And once Ukraine topples, and this is why they're trying to keep Ukraine at the front line, because once they're gone, there's nobody left. And so Russia will easily, once Ukraine is overrun, take over the rest of the continent of Europe. They won't be ready. Germany, of course, weren't allowed to have an army for a long time. Now supposedly have 185,000. Question has been going on there, are we going to introduce conscription? Well, the Defence Minister said we can't. We haven't got the barracks. We can't house them. We haven't got the equipment. We can't enlarge our army. We're not ready. And what have they been doing? Well, they took in 1 million asylum seekers and housed all of them, but they haven't got enough room to house an army to defend themselves. I mean, it's an incredible situation in Europe that's been brought about by the angels, just sorting things out bit by bit and getting everything ready. Well, we are on the brink of a World War III, and World War III might well be before Armageddon. The war in Europe could well be what the world will call World War III, and we may well see that. And it could take place in a number of theatres. It could take place over there in China, invading Taiwan, Iran, of course, in its area, trying to expand its influence. The war in Israel, relatively not involved as a part of the World War, but North Korea is ready for war in the area of southern Korea and Japan. China making its move, and of course Russia and Ukraine. But here is the words of Brother Thomas about, this is on page 88 of Exposition of Daniel, about this conquest of Europe. And they're really, really serious words. He says, there has never been such an age of conquest as that which will soon open up upon the world. Now remember what I said when we were reading Exposition of Daniel? bring it forward to today. Same kind of conditions. Brother Thomas thought Christ was returning in 1868. Didn't happen, we know that. Circumstances seem to be right. They're almost the same today. Almost the same. So read this and bring it forward to today. There has never been such an age of conquest as which will soon open upon the world. And as to the establishment of European freedom and independence, the war to be initiated is the setting in of an overwhelming inundation of Europe that will submerge them under one of the most terrible and scorching despotisms that have ever wrung the heart of nations. Because that man, or somebody exactly like that man we just described, is going to be in charge. And he is totally and utterly a ruthless despot. Terrible and scorching despotism. He takes that from the scriptures. There wasn't particularly a Gog he could point to back then. I think we've got one now. He'll be a despot. So if there is war over in the area of China, Korea and so on, if China does move to take Taiwan, that will be a sideshow. All those things will be sideshows. The main event, the main game is going to be in Europe. And Europe will be smashed. Absolutely smashed. And they will become the prisoners of Russia. This is the kind of man we said. Let's just turn briefly to Daniel chapter 8. Daniel 8. And those few verses which are about the man who will arise as the little horn in the latter days. Okay? Quite clearly. You know, Daniel 8 sort of gives the history of the little horn, and Daniel 11 expands on that history and then comes down to the very last days. And the key is, again, verse 23, the latter time. Okay? Daniel 8:23, the latter time of their kingdom. When the transgressors are come to the full. In other words, when sin has become exceeding sinful. We are in these times when sin has, and rejection of the things of God has become enormous around the world. Transgressors have come to the full. A king of fierce countenance. This is him. Understanding dark sentences. As we said, he understands human nature. He's manipulative. He's deceitful. His power shall be mighty. He stands up, you see, in the last days. Well, this man has stood up at this time. His power will be mighty, not by his own power, because God has raised him up for his purposes. He'll destroy wonderfully. He'll prosper. He'll gain great wealth, which he has. He will practice. That word actually means he will keep on doing things. He's a very, very active man. Putin's single-minded. You know, he cast his family aside. He's got one objective in life. That's to make Russia the grandest country in the world and him the ruler. And he will destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he'll cause craft to prosper. You know, he lies and cheats and deceives. In his hand, he will magnify himself in his heart. There's great pride he's going to press forward with. And no one will stand in his way, and any political opposition is dealt with. And by peace he shall destroy many. He'll talk about peace, but never do it. And he stands up ultimately against the Prince of Princes, and he's destroyed on the mountains of Israel. Broken without hand. God is going to do the job. Broken without hand. So as we said, we need to be clear that Gomer and Magog extends to all of Europe. Brother Thomas says in Help Us Israel that Gomer is the west of Europe, Gaul, Belgium, all the countries bordering upon them, which constituted in our day, he says, the Napoleon Empire. Gomer then points immediately to France. France, of course, the key leader there. And then you've got Germany on the other hand as a part of the Magog area. Magog is the region extending from the Ross or Russia to the Rhine. Countries in his day, Wallachia, Transylvania, Hungary and Germany. So there's Gomer and Magog who come with him. And here in Exposition of Daniel he says, France, as I have said, is Gomerian. It's Gomer. It's part of the Gomer people, the Celts who all moved across in that area. The Celtic tribes populated the areas of Gomer. And as such, must come into confederacy with the great Cossack ruler of the Gogian Empire. The Cossacks, of course, Cossacks are renowned for their agility, actually through their acrobatics too. Very energetic army, military people. The Cossack ruler, the Russian ruler, of the Gogian image. And then, not as a principal, Gomer, France, she will send her conquered and crestfallen hosts to do battle for the autocrat against Britain on the mountains of Israel's land. Because it says, art thou come to take a spoil, says the Arabs in Britain, in Israel. Well, that's yet to happen, but look for it. It's going to happen. Art thou come, says Ezekiel 38, verse 13, to take a spoil. So Brother Thomas says these countries will be present in the Holy Land. We're yet to see that. We're yet to see the Western powers actually move into Israel for their security and defence. And the Arabs, through the Abraham Accords, will have a defence agreement and pact with Israel too. Perhaps like NATO, if one's attacked, then the others come and help. If Israel feels they're about to be attacked, these other countries will come and help. So, as we've said, the king of the north and Gog and the little horn of the goat are one and the same power in control of Constantinople at the time of the end. And there are some pages from Exposition of Daniel all about that. Great book to read and study. And the king of the north, Daniel chapter 11, just over a couple of pages from where we were, comes down like a whirlwind. And he has power in Egypt. And we align that with Isaiah 19. You know, he's the cruel lord and the fierce king. And as we said, it's not something new. It's something that he's been all along. And unfortunately, the Egyptians will be under great pressure at that time. Then comes news out of the north and out of the east, and the consolidation of the forces. Perhaps that's when the British and the Arabs come into Israel. That also might mean that the Christ and the saints are starting to make moves towards Jerusalem too. He goes forth with great fury, verse 44, to destroy and to utterly make away many. And we know that there'll be house-to-house fighting and half of Jerusalem will go into captivity. All these things are terrible events, but they're there for Israel to turn, for Israel to come to accept our Lord and us, his saints, with him at that great day. So this great king will plant the tabernacles of his palace in Jerusalem, in the glorious holy mountain. But, as we read in Daniel chapter 8, he will come to his end without hand, and none shall help him. So there they are, the same person, all described for us clearly in the scripture. Clearly could well be the man we see in that position of power now, or someone like him, or even worse, who can tell if time goes on any longer. But he certainly fits the bill of Scripture, no doubt about that. So Daniel is told in chapter 12, go your way till the end be. Thou shalt rest and stand thy lot at the end of the days. I've given talks here before about the time periods in Daniel chapter 12. And 688 is certainly the start date. There's no other date that could lock in with the 1260 days ending in 1948 with the end of the scattering of the Jewish people, counting back 1260, 688. And it is a primary date of Scripture because then, as Daniel chapter 12 talks about, the abomination of desolation began to be constructed on the Temple Mount. So those dates are locked in. Then comes 1290 days to 1978. And in 1978, the way was opened by President Sadat as a representative of the Muslim people to say, yes, other people can come up now and worship near the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount. And of course, it's taken time for people to accept that. So Daniel was told, blessed are those who wait a bit longer to the 1335 days, which comes in 2023. And in 2023, we saw the most enormous change to our world on the 7th of October. The whole world's attention is drawn to Jerusalem. It doesn't matter which country. Everybody's thinking about these people. The nation of Israel, the city of Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa Mosque, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. Everybody's got that on their attention. The hostages have been there for so long to draw our attention again to Israel every day. And the world's politics have all changed and centred upon taking sides in that particular conflict. We are in this very, very last time. The end of the time of the end. And things are happening so rapidly, it's so hard to keep up with them all, because now we've got the birth pangs and the world is getting ready to give birth to the new kingdom of God. The wise shall understand. Is this man the Gog of Armageddon? Time will tell.
If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment below and let us know what you thought. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Please share it and spread the word.